Hello and welcome to the Race and Rights Podcast. This is Sahar Aziz, distinguished law professor and author of The Racial Muslim: When Racism Quashes Religious Freedom. I also serve as the director of the Rutgers Center for Security, Race and Rights. You can learn more about the center by visiting our website at csrr.rutgers.edu or following us on Instagram at RutgersCSRR or on Twitter, TikTok, and Facebook at RUCSRR. The Race and Rights Podcast explores the myriad issues that adversely impact the civil and human rights of America's diverse Muslim, Arab, and South Asian communities, here as well as abroad. Today's episode addresses Muslim contributions to American prosperity, featuring Dalia Mogahed, the former director of research at the Institute for Social Policy and Understanding. Ms. Mogahed explains how Muslims have long been central in America's political discourse, policy debates, and popular culture, including numerous contributions to economic development, medicine, philanthropy, arts, entertainment, sports, and education in the United States. Yet, most Americans say they don't even know a Muslim, and more than 80% of media coverage of Islam and Muslims in the United States is negative. Let's hear what our guest has to say about this often misunderstood and misrepresented religious minority community.
Thank you so much, Professor Aziz. It's such an honor to be here and to have been invited to this program. I want to thank all of you for joining us this afternoon. The work of this center is so vital, and I truly am honored to be a part of it in some small way. My name is Dalia Mogahed, as you heard, and I'm the Director of Research at the Institute for Social Policy and Understanding. And to start off, I just want you to think about the last Muslim character that you saw on TV. What were they doing? Were they inventing a new surgical technique that saves lives and money? Were they rehabilitating communities destroyed by hurricanes? In all likelihood, they weren't doing either of those things. They were probably a very scary character committing an act of violence or scheming to commit an act of violence. Alternatively, they could have been the valiant, FBI informant telling on the guy who was about to commit an act of violence. So I can say with confidence that that's probably what you saw, because studies have shown that that is overwhelmingly the depiction of Muslims in popular media. And so our center, the Institute for Social Policy and Understanding, has a very simple mission. We provide objective research and education about American Muslims to support well-informed dialogue and decision-making. Because so much of the information that people are being bombarded with is not fact-based and is often incredibly biased. So we have three streams of work. We discover. So what that means is we do rigorous, relevant research, and we partner with academic institutions across the country to conduct that research. And Professor Aziz is actually one of our scholars. And then we educate. We share the research with the public, with the media, with policymakers, and we also equip. We do some deep training of change makers, of decision makers, of influencers. So we create not only workshops, but toolkits and more extensive engagements with specific stakeholders. And so the moment we're in is one where we have a CBS News reporter saying, this isn't a place, with all due respect, like Iraq or Afghanistan. This is a relatively civilized, relatively European city. And I have to choose my words carefully, where you wouldn't expect that. Of course, he's talking about Ukraine and how it's not, Iraq and Afghanistan. It's relatively civilized. And one shudders to imagine what he would have said had he not chosen his words carefully. So this idea of Muslims in general being less civilized, not contributing to the welfare and the well-being of their societies, is hardly even a secret. It's hardly even being hidden anymore. And this terrible conflict in the Ukraine has kind of laid bare this bias that many of us have always observed, but now it's just people have thrown out the dog whistle, if you will. So why does the media matter? Because roughly half of Americans don't know a real Muslim. So where are they getting information about the media? They're getting it, or information about Muslims, they're getting it from the media. And according to one study by Media Tenor, 90% of coverage of Muslims and Islam on TV news media is negative. The New York Times, in fact, was found to portray Islam and Muslims more negatively than cancer and cocaine. And that's a study that looked at the past 25 years. So it was even before the horrific attacks of 9/11. And what's more, research also shows that Muslims are rarely given platforms to speak about their own communities. So between 2015 and 2017, regarding the Muslim ban, something that actually has the word Muslim in the name of it, Muslims only represented 3% of the voices on news media discussing this issue. In contrast, President Trump represented 21% of the voices discussing the Muslim ban. And this matters. It matters to policy. It matters to rights. So one study out of University of Michigan found that reliance on media for information about Muslims was associated with American support for public policies targeting Muslims 3 months later. So it wasn't just right after they saw the story, but it impacted them for a full 3 months later. These policies included military actions against Muslim countries, separate and more thorough airport security lines for Muslim travelers, and believe it or not, even revoking the right to vote for American Muslims. And so this project that we did, which I'm going to be sharing with you today, is really a vital and critical intervention in like breaking through this storm of misinformation by filling gaps, by really filling widespread gaps in knowledge. The MAP project, or Muslims for American Progress, is a project where we did an in-depth analysis of Muslims in New York City. So not far from where you all are, qualified, and we wanted to quantify the contributions of American Muslims in just this one major metropolitan. And we looked at 8 areas of work, or 8 sectors of contribution: medicine, STEM, civics and democracy, philanthropy and nonprofits, education, economics, arts and entertainment, and then also sports. And what we wanted to do is combine the hard facts with human faces to tell the stories of ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Now, accurate demographic data is rarely shared or represented in the media, and even it's not even understood by Muslims themselves in many cases. So in order to better understand who Muslims are, we need to just start out with some basic demographics. So basics, according to Pew, there are roughly 3.5 million Muslims in America, and that makes up about 1% of the US population. Now, I think that number is very interesting because a recent study found that the percentage of Muslims that the American public thinks exists is 27%, and we are in fact 1%. So there is a massive overestimation of the number of Muslims, the percentage of Muslims in America. And that probably is a function of the fact that we are so overrepresented in the media negatively. And so people think we're, taking over, and we're in fact 1% of the population. Now, as far as New York City, the estimate is roughly 800,000 Muslims. I've seen estimates that also say about 1 million Muslims in New York City. So our number was 768,000 roughly. And that makes up roughly 9% of New York City's population are Muslims. So New York City is a place where Muslims definitely have a higher concentration than their average nationally. And it makes up more than 20% of the nation's total Muslim population reside in New York City. There are 285 mosques in New York City alone. So who are American Muslims? The first thing to know is that American Muslims are the most diverse faith community ethnically in the country. What we have here is a comparison of Muslims, Jews, Catholics, Protestants, and non-affiliated Americans. And what you see is that Muslims are the only faith community with no majority race. So the largest percentage of Muslims are identify as Black or African American. That's at 25%. 24% identify as white, 18 as Asian, 18 as Arab, and 7 as mixed, 5 as Hispanic. And then we have 1% identify as Native American, and then other. So a couple things to note. It's, of course, I'm sure if you're on this webinar, you know that not all Muslims are Arab. In fact, only a small minority are, 18%. It's not even the largest group. And you may also know that not all Arabs are Muslim. In fact, about half of American Arabs are Christian. The other thing to note is that Hispanic Muslims are the fastest growing group within the Muslim community. And just a note on a future project I'm very excited about, we're doing a project on Native American and Indigenous Muslims that I think is going to be groundbreaking because that group has never really been studied. Now, half of American Muslims were born in the United States and half were born outside the United States. So it's not accurate to say that all Muslims are immigrants. That's certainly not the case. But the immigrant story is still definitely part of the American Muslim narrative. That said, it's also important to note that there's never been an America without Islam. There's never been an America without Islam. Islam predates, in fact, America's independence. Muslims have been in the United States since before it was even since it was a colony. So the idea that Islam is a new religion to America or a foreign religion simply does not stand up against historical records. Now, Muslims are also by far the youngest community, and that doesn't mean that they're just the newest to America, which I just explained is not the case, but the average age of Muslims is much younger than the general public or any other faith. In fact, the average age of Muslims is a full 20 years younger than the average age of the general public. So Muslims are very young, vibrant, and engaged citizens of the United States. Muslims are most likely to report low income. So a lot of what you'll hear in this presentation does look at Muslims contributing in fields like STEM and medicine, and it might leave you with the impression that all Muslims are rich or all Muslims are highly paid professionals. That's not the case. In fact, a full third of Muslims nationally are living at or below the poverty level. And that's also an important piece to keep in mind. So how did we do this project? We wanted to look at both quantitative and qualitative aspects of American Muslim contributions. So we did a very time-intensive and resource-intensive analysis of the quantitative public records, where we compared a long list of Muslim surnames against public records around licenses, patents, business ownership, to quantify Muslim contributions in these 8 fields of impact. We also did qualitative research where we did extensive interviews and participant observation. And so I want to tell you the stories of a few New Yorkers that are Muslim that really exemplify the diversity and the contributions of American Muslims, especially in New York City. So Dr. Farah Alam is director of the dental unit of the Rose F. Kennedy Children's Evaluation and Rehabilitation Center. Now, what's really special about Dr. Farah is her work deals with special care dentistry for medically complex and behaviorally challenged dental patients. She is also the director of the Rose F. Kennedy Fellowship in Special Care Dentistry, which is one of the few programs in the entire country that trains dentists to work with patients with special needs. She's the first Muslim director of this center and one of the first women to ever hold this position as well. And she's not alone. When we looking more broadly at Muslims' impact in New York City's medical field, we found that while Muslims are less than 9% of New York City's populace, Muslims overrepresent in various medical fields, including pharmacy, clinical lab technology, medicine, and physical therapy. Muslim doctors in New York City see more than 5 million patients a year, and their dentists more than 1 million patients a year. They also create 36,000 jobs, either directly or indirectly. And Muslim physicians contribute $384 million in state taxes and pay more than $4 billion in local wages and benefits. And pharmacists fill out more than 9 million prescriptions. So in other words, this idea of banning Muslims, New York City would lose, its entire medical industry would basically collapse if Muslims didn't call it home. Another extraordinary woman that we discovered in doing this research is Noor Zenumar. She works in a related field, in this case, STEM, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. She has a PhD in epidemiology, and she works on cancer research at the Mailman School of Public Health in Columbia University. Dr. Zenumar is part of the National Cancer Institute's funded research on genomics and population-based studies on breast cancer. Her project focuses on genetic predisposition as well as lifestyle factors. She tells us that she is passionate about translating scientific findings from the world of complex science to a broader population-based study that can impact many more people. She says that, in her interview, she said that poverty used to kill people a long time ago. Now it is all about this excess that is killing us and killing the planet. And she told us that she thinks that scientists are like artists because we have to take so much rejection, it's creative, and we have to think outside the box. In the field of STEM, from 2010 to 2015, employment in STEM in New York City grew 21%, and Muslims make up 11% of New York City's engineers. Women in STEM specifically were very strongly represented in New York City among Muslims. And we found, in earlier research, let me just go back here, that ISPU national poll also found that just as a general kind of trend, Muslim women are more likely to be highly educated and surpass Muslim men in education. And that includes in STEM fields. Now I want you to meet Mikhail DeVoe, and he is the co-founder and executive director of Citizens Against Recidivism. He used his own experience being formerly incarcerated to assist prisoners and their family members, as well as support re-entry into society. He specifically creates a pathway for ex-prisoners to move on with their lives and continue to contribute to their communities through his nonprofit. Now, Citizens Against Recidivism has received major recognition, including a Soros Fellowship, recognition from Manhattan Borough President Scott Stinger, and cooperation with major civil rights organizations such as the NAACP. And his quote is really emblematic of really what he stands for. He said, "You serve Allah by serving the community, by helping your fellow human beings." Philanthropy is another area where we found Muslims really stood out. Now, as you may know, there's a huge emphasis on charity in Islam. Not only is zakah or almsgiving a pillar of Islam, but there are countless prophetic teachings that encourage Muslims to give. What we found in our research is that Muslims are absolutely heeding that call. One part of our study where we looked at consumer spending analysis, we found that the average Muslim New Yorker household spent 33% more in charity in 2016 than the average household nationally. And keep in mind also that piece about that Muslims represent the highest percentage of people with low income. And despite that, Muslims on average spend 33% more than the average household on charity nationally. And through our interviews with Muslim nonprofits, and these are just numbers that we were able to directly count, but in just New York City, Muslims donated at least $600 million in just 1 year to charity, more than 125,000 pounds of food and more than 1,000 hours of free mental health counseling. And I do say at least because this was just what we were able to record. This was just looking at the handful of nonprofits that we were able to reach and had, the right records, or, were able to give us those numbers. This doesn't, include people who are giving anonymously or giving to other outlets. We also found that Muslims in philanthropy and nonprofits focus not only on meeting human needs, but also going above and beyond to support others, for instance, being at the forefront of Hurricane Sandy relief. The other point that I think was interesting is that regardless of what field of impact we were looking at, whether it was the arts or medicine, everyone we interviewed was also doing something having to do with philanthropy. So just because they're in the section on STEM, they were also volunteering their time, or they were also mentoring, or they were also donating. So I thought that was a really important thread, that across fields, philanthropy was a part of their story. And I think this story of Hurricane Sandy relief was, especially striking, really interesting. So ICNA Relief and Islamic Relief were at the forefront of relief efforts for Hurricane Sandy. And this quote from an ICNA relief volunteer who provided relief to the hardest hit neighborhoods, Midland Beach and Staten Island, I think was interesting. He said, "Unfortunate circumstances bring people together and break down the wall people put up that prevent them from knowing one another." Interestingly, this was, incidentally, a neighborhood where the building of a mosque was blocked by residents. And the same volunteer further explained how watching Muslim volunteer clear lawns and houses of debris of the same neighbors, of the same people who were actually blocking the building of a mosque, those same residents apologized for blocking the building of that mosque and really changed the dynamic of that neighborhood. Sarah Saeed is another, example of a Muslim leader in New York City. Dr. Sarah Saeed, who some of you may have even heard of, is a prominent example of a Muslim woman practicing in civic engagement and the democratic process. She is the senior advisor in the Community Affairs Unit in the New York City government, appointed by Mayor Bill de Blasio in 2015. She's tasked with the responsibility of engaging the Muslim community in the genesis and formation of city policy. She was previously a trailblazer in interfaith work, uniting religious leaders from diverse backgrounds to address city-level social problems. Now, in the field of economics, Azra Khalfan is CEO of a company called Plaques by Azra, founded by her father 43 years ago after her family immigrated to New York from Tanzania. The company engraves, does digital printing and laser cutting for such clients as government offices, nonprofits, and corporations. Her products have been sent to prime ministers and Nobel Prize winners. And she spoke extensively about her experience as a woman in the business world. She said, "It's an interesting thing when you're around other women business owners who face the same challenges as you do, to know that you're not alone, and if they can do it, you can do it too." Now, Muslim impact on economics was really remarkable. Regardless of faith, racial, or political background, there's one thing that we all agree is incredibly important and is always on people's minds, which is the economy. In 2016, in just 1 year, Muslim New York consumer spending totaled almost $17 billion. That means that Muslims contributed $17 billion to the New York City economy. We also found that compared to the national average, Muslim households in New York City spent 36% more in total consumer spending, and especially when it came to education, 4 times more on education and 33% more on charity, as I mentioned. But I think that some of the most important isn't just consumer spending, but in job creation. The most important kind of impact that American Muslims have nationally and in New York City is in them being generators of jobs. So in 2016, Muslims owned at least 95,000 businesses in New York City alone. And that amounted to approximately 250,000 jobs that they created. That's more than the Chrysler company, which, if you remember, we all paid billions of dollars to bail out because of their importance as job creators for Americans. And they're about at 180,000 jobs. Muslim New Yorkers alone create far more than that, 250,000 American jobs. Some of the kind of interesting little features that we found is, some of the quintessential or iconic New York City, aspect of the city, like taxi drivers. Muslims comprise 40% of New York City taxi drivers today, providing over 40 million taxi trips in 2016 alone. And this became especially important during COVID because they were the frontline workers, transportation, taking people to their doctor's appointments, taking people to the airport, and really were putting themselves in danger to make sure that people got to where they needed to be. 9% of the population of New York City, 40% of the taxi drivers. Food carts. Anyone who's been to New York City knows that every single food cart that I've ever seen there has been halal, and there's a reason for that, right? 57% of New York City food vendors are Muslim. The New York Times did a story on Muhammad Abu al-Ainin, a man who previously sold hot dogs and today sells halal options such as gyro and chicken. He said, we figured out that most of the cab drivers are Egyptian or Pakistani, and they suffer too much from no halal. So there's this connection between the fact that all the cab drivers, 40% of the cab drivers are Muslim, and all the halal food carts. Of course, you may have heard of the Halal Guys. It's now a famous chain all over the country, and it started as a food truck in New York City. Now meet Zain Abdullah. He is an associate professor of religion and society and Islamic studies at Temple University. He authored the book Black Mecca, The African Muslims of Harlem, writing about how Islam mattered in the lives of both Muslims and non-Muslims in relation to their racial and ethnic identity. He was awarded the 2018 Ford Foundation Senior Fellowship to write an intellectual history on Islam and the American character. He's also working on film crews for a 3-part PBS special on Muslim Americans, as well as a 6-part series on Malcolm X for Netflix. And impact on education was huge in New York City among Muslims. So 1.1 million students are taught in over 1,800 public schools in New York City, the largest public school system in the United States, one of the largest in the world, of course. And nearly 10,000 teachers of K through 12 New York City public schools are Muslim, 10,000. And they teach more than 250,000 students every year. Over $1 billion is spent on education by Muslim households in New York City annually, and that's more than 4 times more than the average American household, demonstrating Muslims' commitment to education. And I know Professor Aziz will attest to that in terms of the way we were both raised, right? Ali Abbas is an American Muslim writer and filmmaker and New Yorker of Lebanese descent. He is the creator and producer of The Ridge. So American Muslims also make an incredible impact on the field of arts and entertainment. It's a series about a group of Brooklyn Muslim youth with superpowers and he's also the current diversity fellow at the Upright Citizens Brigade. He recently released The Girl Deep Down Below, a web series produced by the Chicago Digital Media Production Fund about a group of young Muslim girls who unite to stop abductions of young women. In science fiction, he's found creative opportunities to reclaim the narrative that rejects the good Muslim, bad Muslim binary that exists in Hollywood that I was referring to in the very beginning of our presentation. There was also this wonderful, maybe some of you saw it, exhibit in the Children's Museum of Manhattan called America to Zanzibar in 2015, Muslim Cultures Near and Far. It was really a surprise blockbuster for the museum, attracting over 350,000 visitors to the museum. And if you notice the year, of course, it was during the election season, during a time when Muslims were being called on to, Muslim bans were being announced and certain candidates were competing and how anti-Muslim they were. One of the responses was to do this beautiful exhibition. Dr. Rashid, one of our interviewees and the chief consultant and community liaison on this exhibit, explained the philosophy behind this project, which is now on tour across the US. He said, "My philosophy with my work is that I cannot represent the totality of American Muslim experiences, but I can help frame that discussion and find people to tell their own story." What was great with working with the Children's Museum exhibition was showing what's possible when you work with the right people in terms of having an impact on the general population. And then in the field of sports, and I love the story of Zainab Ismaili, who I also follow on Instagram and encourage you to as well if you're interested in health and fitness. She is a fitness trainer and multidimensional health guru. She worked as a celebrity trainer for years in Hollywood before converting to Islam and beginning her work, Fit for Allah, which takes on prophetic traditions regarding health, medicine, and food and melds them with fitness practices. Ismaili has traveled the globe teaching others how to be personal trainers, as well as post-rehabilitation techniques in universities and even Olympic centers, through which she became a world-renowned teacher of trainers. Ismaili currently works as a personal trainer at a gym in Manhattan. She also spends time doing charity work. Again, this theme of charity, no matter what you're doing, people are doing charity with small pockets of Muslim communities in different parts of Mexico, as well as Cuba. And she's, of course, of Latinx descent. And so to close off, I hope that the information you've learned today can be used to broaden the understanding of who the American Muslim community really is, and for us to all choose facts over fear and to speak out against misinformation with sound research. So to read more about this work, please visit ispu.org or muslimsforamericanprogress.com. And thank you so much, and I look forward to our discussion.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode of the Race and Rights podcast. This podcast is hosted by the Center for Security, Race and Rights, housed at Rutgers Law School, also known as the People's Electric Law School. CSRR engages in research, education, and advocacy on issues that adversely impact the civil and human rights of America's diverse Muslim, Arab, and South Asian communities. We do so through an interfaith, cross-racial, and interdisciplinary approach. To hear additional episodes of the Race and Rights podcast, check out our pages on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, and everywhere else podcasts are available. Now, for a deep dive on these issues, visit our website at csrr.rutgers.edu, where you can find policy reports, teach-ins, and news commentary by our over 130 faculty affiliates. To watch our over 80 academic and public policy lectures, subscribe to our YouTube channel at Rutgers Center for Security, Race and Rights. And on social media, be sure to follow us on Instagram at Rutgers CSRR and on Twitter and Facebook at RUCSRR. Finally, you can financially support the Center for Security, Race and Rights by going to our website at csrr.rutgers.edu and press the donate button. And please give generously. As always, be well and see you next time.